So hello, IT201. This video is specific to solving the pink shader issue that about 10% of the class gets when they do the WebGL build and upload to itch.io and then test that build. And they'll notice everything that they're drawing, all these 3D primitives are being rendered out as pink and not all, as these random colors as they appear in the Unity editor when they playtest. It's basically when you write code red, either the red squiggle in Visual Studio or when you get the warning, the red lines of code in the console telling you that there's something wrong, red means an error with your code, something is an issue. With shader code, we're using C# in Unity, but there's a different coding language that deals with putting flushing images through the graphics card, putting computer graphic information onto your GPU, which gets rendered to your monitor. So that coding language is called shaders, and you don't get exposed to it. We're using the default materials and shaders that are coming from Unity. But for some reason, some of your machines, whenever it compiles the WebGL code, the shaders, the default shaders coming out of Unity cause an error. So this is the workaround. I'm going to show you how to do it. And it basically just gets you into Sprint 2 a little bit more. So it's not extra work. You're going to have to do this anyway as you move into Sprint 2. But for some of you, this 10% or so that gets errors, gets this pink object shown in WebGL, we'll have to do this now before the end of Sprint 1. So as you can see here, I have the completed Sprint 1 project. This is essentially more or less how your app's going to work. And the first step here is in project. Make sure you have a prefabs folder and a materials folder. All right, so you notice I just have a bunch of prefabs and materials already. But for you, you're probably more or less, you might have a material or something, or probably nothing in prefabs. So create a prefabs folder. I am going to create a new subfolder within prefabs called Fall 2020, just so that we have something empty to look in. Let me just spell that correctly. Lowercase it with the other. And since there's not that many materials, I'll just place it within here. But you will have a folder called prefabs and a folder called materials. So first off, we need a material. So let's create material. That was right click to get the create menu. And the issue is that these Unity default materials or geometries being created is what's generating this shader issue. So we just need to create our own material. So I'll just call it Fall 2020. You call it whatever. Make sure it's just the standard shader, and you don't even need to mess with anything. The color will be changed at runtime. I don't even care if it's gray. You can set it to something else. It doesn't matter. The color is going to get overwritten. You just need your own material as a file sitting in your project view. Now, next step, we're going to come up here, create 3D objects. We're going to create a cube. We're going to create a sphere. We're going to create a cylinder. Looks like I already have a sphere in here. I'll just delete this so I can rename this to a default sphere. Now we have 3 of these. Now notice up here in the position that they have some random numbers put in. It's just a thing Unity does, so like when you're generating stuff, they don't all sit on top of each other and you don't even notice what the stuff is. But to create prefabs, we want to zero out the position information. So I shift clicked, I have all 3 objects selected, and I'm just going to zero out the X, zero out the Y, zero out the Z. And the reason for that is when we save these prefabs to disk, when we save them to file, long-term storage, and we instantiate them or generate them at runtime, we don't want there to be an offset. So when we generate them and then set their position, we don't want to increase the risk that, okay, we figured out the position based on the user's mouse position, we added a distance or a Z, And then that gets added into an already existing offset, an already existing numbers in XYZ. And so then the objects will appear like offset from where the mouse cursor is. We don't want that. So I take all three of these objects, zero out their position. See how they're just sitting in front of the camera. Great. Next step, materials. Fall 2020. I'm just going to slap it on. You saw how I'll just undo that. We had the default material. And I just drag this material. The mouse cursor has to look like this. It can't look like that. You have to drag it. Notice how the whole shader, it's like I'm getting the X. I can't drop it. You have to minimize that shader and drop it right underneath it. There you go. So let me click each one at a time. Cube has the correct shader. Sphere has the shader. Cylinder has the shader. We're good. So you will go into the root of prefabs, and you didn't just select all three. You can't drag all three at once. You have to drag one at a time. Cube, sphere. Notice as I'm dragging down, they're turning blue as opposed to this gray. And cylinder. Now they have all three saved to disk. Here's their location. .prefab is the file. These are now just copies sitting in my hierarchy, sitting in my game scene, sitting in memory. They're useless right now because I want the file versions are what we can read from disk and then write to memory as many times as we need to as the user is clicking or dragging. So these are useless. They've done their job. I've saved out all the information here to disk. So that's one big step or two. We got our material, we got our prefabs. We're doing great. Now this is my one script that has been created for Sprint 1. I'm going to double click on it so that Visual Studio can open. And remember, you should be using the community version of Visual Studio. All you need to do is create a free Microsoft account, connect it to an existing email address, or just create a new one. It's for free, and then you have access to Visual Studio all you need to. All right, so here's my finished script. Now, this is where the videos get you to. There might be a few lines that are doing a little something different, like for example, this start method is just sending out a debug. Forget about it. You know, the core of the script is the same as you got to it. So this is where we're figuring out, should we generate sphere, cube, or cylinder? And the problem is this create primitive is generating Unity default objects with Unity default materials. It's not going to work. All right. So workaround time. Let's just go to the bottom of all the variables we declared. You can place this anywhere in your list of variables as long as it's at the top outside of a method. And we're going to say public game object. Just say prefab sphere. Let's see, what am I generating? Sphere, cube, and then cylinder. Okay. Prefab cube, prefab cylinder, and semicolon. So what we did is we generated or declared three variables of type game object all on one line, and they're public. Or you can also, if you want to get fancy, I'll just take this up here and say they're private, meaning they can only be, these variables can only be modified from any objects coming from this class, but they are of type serialized field, meaning that they will still be exposed to the Unity's inspector. This, in any case, either public or make it a little bit more protected as following object-oriented principles, and make it private, but then declare it as a serialized field so that Unity exposes it into the inspector. Ultimately, you, the developer, can assign what should these three be. So I'm going to save it at this point. Go back to Unity and let the script compile. Notice that the little wheel is turning down here and Unity is frozen. And now notice our script is updated. Here's the three prefabs. The variables, their references, they want to know, who am I pointing at? What is this prefab you talk about? and we have to tell it. So currently it's pointing at nothing. It's a null pointer. This reference variable has nothing to reference. But no, I did create the 3 prefabs. These are instances. These are prefabs, meaning a collection of object data parameters that I've saved to disk. And now I can access it. So prefab sphere, drag and drop. Prefab cube, drag and drop. Prefab cylinder, drag and drop. Now these 3 variables know that whenever I reference them, I'm talking about these files. In this location, this file. Great. So that was another big step. And then the last step is we don't want to generate Unity default stuff anymore. So primitive equals, still good. We still want that primitive reference variable type game object that's internal to us that we later on can just manipulate the scale and the position of whatever we're generating over and over and over again. We can always reference it at the time of creation to mess around with it and then move on if the user is still clicking. So we're going to use a new method called instantiate. So primitive equals instantiate. It creates an object. Perfect. Now it's whatever object that we choose to have. So in this case, it's going to be prefab sphere and semicolon. So notice the difference here. I'm still generating the sphere, and actually it's almost identical to Unity's default sphere, but it's mine. It's using my material, my geometry, and this will fix your shader errors that happen at runtime. And so I could copy this, paste it here. And instead of sphere, we had a cube. Oop, I missed the I. And I can just paste it here. And here we had cylinder. All right. So case 0, we're going to generate sphere. Case 1, a cube. Case 2, the cylinder. Save. And let the script compile. We are good. Click play. And it all looks the same. It looks identical, but you're now generating your own prefabs. And this will fix this shader error that's resulting in pink objects. And it kind of upgrades your code a little bit. You're getting a little bit ahead into Sprint 2. The only thing I forgot to mention is I still have an asterisk up here. I didn't save my Unity scene. So let me just Control S and save that. And you should be saving before you click play because you could have a crash situation. Then it kind of, you have to do everything all over again. So save, test, we're good. Great. So the only thing I wanted to note is that some people weren't putting in the right scene. So some people had like the sample scene, or they were working in another scene, but they had another scene connected up here. When you're building, make sure you're building to WebGL. Make sure you note the project, the scene you're working on. This one's Sprint 01 project. Look, I'm building Sprint 02. I'm going to get something different when I build because it's a different scene. So you can just click these, you can hit delete, whatever. You can find the scene that you want, which is this one. Or there's also a button, add open scenes. I currently have it open, so I could just click this button. There it is. You can delete it. Or you can just drag it in. There you go. You have to be very specific every step of the way. All right, and that should fix anyone's having those